Let's go.
Good morning and welcome to the 26th ever Sunday Assembly in San Diego. Thank you very, very much for being here. My name is Stephen Soden. I'm your co-host today.
I'm Amy Leary, your co-host as well. Every Sunday Assembly has a theme, and our theme for this month is reality.
And before we get started today, I want to make sure you know that we have a media-free zone. We are recording this event, so if you do not want to be videotaped or photographed, please sit in designated area. And here we go. So Paul's, I'm sorry, Amy. We're co-hosting.
Kicking things off is our first sing-along. Please welcome our musical director, Paul Svensson, and we'll be singing Don't Worry, Be Happy by Bobby McFerrin.
I need you to snap your fingers. If you sing bass, you can do a little of that. Come on, pucker up and whistle. Oh, I see you back there trying not to do it. Come on. Here's a little song I wrote. I'd like you to learn it note for note. Don't worry. Be happy. Every life we have some trouble. But when you worry, you make it double. Don't worry. Be happy. Sing it now. La la la. Sing oh do da la 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 do do la 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 la. Whatever feels good to you, do it now. Again. La 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 da 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 da. Don't worry. Da 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 da. Be happy. Ain't got no place to lay your head. Someone came and took your bed, but don't worry. Be happy. Come over here, Leah, sing with me. The landlord said the rent is late. Going to have to litigate, and don't worry. Be happy. Don't worry, be happy, and la 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 la. Don't worry. Be happy. La 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 la. Oh, do it again. You're sounding good. La 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. Where's my percussion section? Ain't got no cash, ain't got no style, ain't got no friends to make you smile, so don't worry. Be happy. 'Cause when you worry, your face will frown. It will bring everybody down, so don't worry. Oh, be happy. Let's all stand up and sing if you feel like it. Come on now. La 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 la. Don't worry now. La 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 la. Be happy. La 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 la. Sing it again now. La 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. So there it is, this song I wrote. I hope you learned it note for note. Be happy. In your life, expect some trouble, but when you worry, you make it double. Don't worry, no, 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 no. Be happy, and don't worry, be happy now. La 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 la. Don't worry, la la la. go back to snap and whistle. Ready? There's the beat. Don't rush. Sounding good. All one more time, just for fun.
That sounded like the birds singing in spring. That was very nice, actually.
Tweet, 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 tweet.
Well, welcome to Sunday Assembly. Sunday Assembly is a radically inclusive, secular community that meets monthly to hear great talks, to sing silly songs, to connect for community events, and to have some snacks at the end, but mostly we meet to celebrate this one life that we know that we have.
We have a motto here at Sunday Assembly. Our motto is live better, help often, and wonder more. So listen up through the program. You'll hear some announcements with some opportunities to do all three of those things. And by show of hands, how many people are attending their first assembly today? First time joining us? Woo! Woo! We're glad to see you.
Oh,
everybody lean over and give those people a high five. Awesome.
Let me get your notes together.
Yes.
I've lost my... Woo! That was exciting. So now's the time when we like to do something we call Life Happens. Life Happens is when we share some things that are going on in our lives. There's a little 3x5 card section at the front as you come in the door and a box to place it in. So if you've got something happy, something sad going on, share it with us. We love to hear it. We'd like to start our Life Happens this time by taking just a minute to acknowledge the terror attacks that we have suffered this past week and in the past few weeks, not only in Brussels, but also in Iraq, the Ivory Coast, and Yemen. There's a lot of things going on all over the world, so we grieve with those people. On a little bit happier of a note, we have several things to share. This card says, we are celebrating my mother's 75th birthday today. Our entire family on my mother's side is here, including two of my siblings, and that's our own Stephen Soden. Woo! Our next Life Happens is I had a business trip to Japan this month, brought my wife along, and we were able to spend a few extra days visiting relatives, including our granddaughter. We had a great time. That's Mark Leary, who's out welcoming people, but I am the wife in this scenario, so I can attest that it was indeed a great time. And Kate turned 40 this week, or this month, and also was carded at her 40th birthday party. That is an occasion for celebration. And last but certainly not least, our own beloved Leah is getting married in 2 weeks. Woo! And next we have our reading. Our reading this month will be by Stephanie Hamovich.
Voice to project, so I'm going to need that. Thanks. Technical difficulties here. These are 2 unpublished poems from the chemo anxiety instructor at Smith College, who's a mother of 2 children and a beekeeper. In her own words, I wrote a great deal of poetry in undergraduate and graduate schools, and even won some awards for my work. But sometime in my late 20s or early 30s, I lost faith in poetry, which seemed suddenly too precious and too self-involved. Last year, though, when I was undergoing treatment for breast cancer, I suddenly felt I had to write poetry. It just sort of happened. And perhaps it is still too self-involved. But maybe when we involve ourselves, we can actually learn something beyond ourselves if we're smart about it. So while the author was going through cancer treatment, she was also on Ativan, which is an anti-anxiety medication. So this can often cause very vivid, colorful dreams. So immediately after her dreams, she would pick up her pen and start writing some poetry. So these are some of the poems that resulted from that. Ativan poem number 4, A Magical Visit. The elegant man knelt beside my bed, his eyes amethyst, his hair a cushion of white, and extended a long elfin finger to trace the line down my cheek. "You've lost weight," he said. "You've got to eat, or your gown will rattle on your bones like husks." I was torn. Who wouldn't be? Who doesn't want the soft danger of fairy, or the will-o'-the-wisp, the stolen child, all that? But the voice of my wise and rational mother came to me. She's nearly always right. It seems to me that this man is being very rude. And so I turned to him, "How dare you presume to judge me? You know nothing of me or my life or my afflictions." I got all sociological on him then. Women's bodies are scrutinized enough. by human patriarchy, without fairy kings throwing in their 2 cents or 3 pine cones or whatever you woodland creatures use. That was a bit much, but I let it stand. His eyebrows were in his hairline by now, and he had withdrawn his finger. My mother would be proud. I would tell her this morning. "This," I said, "is where you get off, Fairy King," and with that, I turned over in bed to signal his dismissal, even though I'm not as comfortable on that side. Ativan poem number 9, Hair. When my hair comes back, it will be silver and gray and black, curly and straight, the hair of a witch and a madwoman and an artist. It will be unruly. It will flow out behind me and grab songbirds from the air and hold them until they give up their songs. It will have its own agenda. I will wrap it around my breasts and belly like a prayer shawl for a mad god, and my prayer will be, "Screw you." But my hair will keep its own counsel. It will dig its way into the earth, between my toes tickling, and commune with the worms. It will visit with the dead and bring back their songs and their stories. It will tell me the slang they use to mock the living. My hair will know things, and it will have no truck with anything. It will send a tendril out to brush the cheeks of so many men, and a few women, who will feel jittery and drunk, like 2 espressos and 4 tequila shots. And I'll finally remember that a woman of my stature should wear the clouds as a hat, and should stride up the hills with strong, long legs, and with her hips in full swing.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. That was awesome. Our speaker today is Brian Keating. He's an astrophysicist with the University of California, San Diego Department of Physics. He and his team members developed sensitive instrumentation to study the early universe in the microwave, radio wave, and infrared wavelength regimens of the electromagnetic spectrum. He is the author of over 100 scientific journals and U.S. patent holder. His Bachelor of Science degree is from Case Western Reserve University, his PhD from Brown University. He did his postdoctoral research at Stanford, and he was an NSF postdoctoral fellow at Caltech before coming to UCSD in 2004. In 2007, he earned the Presidential Early Career Award for Scientists and Engineers at the White House from then President Bush for his work on a telescope that he designed and fielded called the BICEP at the U.S. Edmondson Scott South Pole Research Station, and he is co-leader of the telescope collaboration in the Atacama Desert of Chile called Polar Bear. Please welcome for his second time here, Professor Brian Keating. Okay. Here, I can get it. Is that it? There we go. Good. All right, well, it's a pleasure to be back here today on another beautiful Sunday in San Diego. It's been almost exactly a year since I was here last time, although I hope to convince you that perhaps no time has passed since I've been here last. I'll explain what that means. But first I wanted to give you guys a little quiz. You know, professors like to give quizzes. Maybe this will work, maybe it won't work. So the first quiz is, what does today have to do in particular with this game called Adventure? Anyone play Adventure obsessively as an 8-year-old, keeping it away from their 12-year-old older brother on their Atari 2600 that they got with their brother's bar mitzvah money? Anybody? Does anybody know Adventure? All right, well then you're all going to fail this quiz miserably. All right, there was a game in 1979, and then it was popularized in the Atari 2600 platform that I think was the very first real endeavor to popularize what would later become known as virtual reality. Virtual reality itself was only coined about 12 years ago by Jared Lanier and a few other people, but this game actually had a world within a world, and then moreover, you could actually go through this world and find an Easter egg. Does anybody know what an Easter egg is? Not the kind that you guys are not celebrating today, okay? But an Easter egg is a little hidden treasure that you find by going through a series of steps that seems unintentional or added on by the designer. The designer is sort of this godlike creature that he created this virtual world within a world, and if you followed this exact set of steps and took this magical pill somewhere, you would come out and you would get notified that this game was created by Warren Robinett. And this was a thrill when my older cousin showed me how to do this on my Atari 2600. But this is the first Easter egg in history, and so that's obviously what it has to do with today. And I hope to tell you that we've come a long way in the last, 34 years, 35 years, 36 years. So, when we last met a year ago, we talked about the multiverse, and I'm not going to go into it. You can see the video, I believe it's online from last time, but suffice it to say that I made some arguments that modern cosmologists like myself, theoretical cosmologists who work with experimentalists like myself, have found that there's a lot of at least circumstantial evidence for something called inflation. And inflation I described last year is sort of the spark that ignited this explosive expansion, which we later call the Big Bang. So if that is true, then many theorists predict that it's essentially inescapable that there will be a multiverse. So I talked about this a little bit. I have on my website some links that you guys can explore more. It's really the most fascinating thing I've ever encountered in my life, and it just happens to be surreptitiously, or serendipitously rather, that it has exact ramifications on my research. So I'm building experiments, telescopes, taking them to the Atacama Desert in the South Pole, and it has to do with the multiverse. And that's quite cool, because we showed last time, we discussed that if the multiverse scenario is true, there could be greater than 10 to the 500 universes. It could be, in fact, infinite. Not 500, 10, a 1 with 500 zeros after it. So that's enormous. And it actually could be infinite, and if it were truly infinite, many people, Max Tegmark and others, say that essentially this gathering is going on an infinite number of times within the multiverse, okay? So what's interesting about doing that is that even if it's not infinite, it may be possible that the repetition of universe-sized domains occurs with large enough probability that at least this scenario is happening a large number of times. So you don't even need an infinite multiverse. You need a finite but big enough multiverse to contain a very large number of beta universes. So I showed this last time. Universes come into and out of existence. They may last as long as our universe. 13.8 billion years is the age of our observable portion of the universe. And right now, a lot of philosophers at least have issues with this, because it doesn't seem to be falsifiable. It seems that you can create many different scenarios that are essentially predicting the same outcome. And so it's sort of a no-lose proposition to predict that there's a multiverse. Again, I can refer you, and I do on my website, to many much better explicators of such a scenario. But if there is a multiverse, and if you really believed it, then there could be infinite number of copies of us. But you wouldn't even need that to have a repetition of virtual selves. In other words, you could have many copies of yourself even without the multiverse, and that's what I'm going to talk about today, a virtual multiverse, which some argue we're actually in right now, okay? So we are actually virtual creatures being visited from a future or perhaps very, very near future existence. And I took an informal poll on Twitter, a very scientific poll right before this talk, and it was about 50-50. People think they're actually simulated or real, okay? If you want to find out if you're real, by the way, next month, right after, I think the day after the next Sunday assembly, try not paying your taxes and see if there are any consequences. Okay, that's my experimentalist approach to the multiverse. So right after I came last year, I got a really good idea. I think it's a good idea. How many of you guys own a star or have bought a star for another friend of yours? Got a couple of you guys. I see Paul. Okay, well, that's really good news, because to astronomers this means absolutely nothing, okay? So professional astronomers, we don't recognize this, we don't classify this, but I said, there's 100 billion stars in our galaxy, but if there's a multiverse, there's an infinite number of universes. So why think small? Why buy stars for Paul? Buy him a whole universe. Okay, so see me after the show, Paul. Okay, speaking of Paul, so this led us last time to at least think that perhaps there is a notion that we project this notion of free will onto ourselves, but in reality we may not actually have free will. And that is an implication directly out of the multiverse scenario. So why do we think that we are who we think we are? So look at these two pictures, a little hard to see with the light, but can you spot the difference between these pictures? If you look at it, which one would you say has some doctoring done to it? One's an original, and the other one may have had some doctoring done to it. Then who thinks the left is the real original image? Raise your hand if you think the left one is the original image. Raise your hand if you think the right one is the original image. Raise your hand if you didn't raise your hand. Okay, there we go. Okay, of course they're exactly the same, so there is no difference. So those of you who didn't raise your hand are actually correct for a change. None of the above was the right answer. Too bad I didn't have that on my SATs. The notion that you have this ability to perceive patterns within images or data of any kind is inherently, we think, inherently human, but actually it often is biased because we have these notions of what actually is reality. So I want to take you on a quick trip through past history on the multiverse or different ramifications of rather virtual reality, and maybe perhaps start to think about seriously for the first times what would be the implication of this, because we're getting to the point now where we can simulate phenomena that are as different from the world of, say, the most advanced Star Wars CGI animation, as different as that is from that highly pixelated adventure game in 1979. We're now so far beyond where we were 10 years ago in simulation of fundamental physical phenomena that it blows my mind, and I hope to blow your mind, at least partially. So pretty much all of you have a virtual assistant in your pocket of one form or another, and all of you got here by one route or another thanks to software and hardware. So we don't even think about it, but 50 years ago there was no software running your life. It didn't run your phone, it didn't run your computer, it didn't run your GPS, your car. Even a simple car now has loaded with software, and that can be quite a security risk, as people are finding out. So, of course, this has been popularized in many, many movies, most famously The Matrix, and so I'll talk a little bit about that. And many great visionaries, some of them listed on here, have really thought about this, and this is 50 years in the case of Arthur C. Clarke and other people, 50 years before the advent of supercomputer technology that I'll just barely brush on today was even a possibility. So we all have these things, and we're becoming so used to them. And actually, I bet all of you guys have virtual lives, or virtual realities online, where you have different identities online. I know I do. I masquerade and spy on people, but in reality, there's many, many different individual realities for each physical human being today on the earth, and I'll talk very briefly about that. So I'm just going to quickly go through this. I don't have too much time. I did put links on my website if you're interested. So I want to talk about how we're doing this as physicists, and it's this fascinating tool called lattice quantum chromodynamics, invented by theoretical physicists to simulate the most basic fundamental building blocks of nature, which you'd think would be really easy, but it's incredibly difficult to do, and I'll explain why. Then I'll talk about how much farther we can go and what you really need to do that, and then what are the implications if this scenario, just like I asked you to consider, what if the multiverse were true? What if virtual reality, and these simulated existences are actual reality, and we're what's virtual. We are software. So I want you guys to think about that as well. So the first thing I want you guys to look at are these two images here. These are both computer simulations. One is of a neuron in the brain, and one is of a vast collection of ordinary matter and dark matter in intergalactic medium. So which do you think is which? Do you think the left side is the galaxy simulation, or is it the neuron simulation? Is the right side neuron or galaxy? You don't have to answer. I'll just tell you. This is a brain cell, and this is the universe. They have an incredible amount of similarity, and we've discussed this, and I've spoken with my friends and colleagues, neuroscientists at UCSD, about this phenomena, that they seem to be governed by an underlying phenomena that is common between them, even though they couldn't be more different, the neuron, the brain, and the entire universe. It got me thinking, if you look at simulations of neurons, and then you look at simulations of neutrons, it only differs by one letter, interestingly. There's actually 100 billion neurons in your brain, and there's 100 billion stars in our galaxy. There are many different coincidences, and the question is, you'd like to be able to explain coincidences, right? You guys especially like to be able to explain just what are called just-so stories, right? So why is that? Don't just say it's a coincidence. Look for reasons to explain an underlying governing principle. That's what physicists do. So I'll talk about two singularities. One is called the technical singularity, where the pace of ever-expanding computer power and robotics, artificial intelligence, leads to self-sentient individual robot creatures that can assemble themselves, or computer programs that can write themselves. Guess what? Those already exist. There are computer programs that write computer programs. And if you don't think that's, potentially scary, I'd like to take that Ativan that you're taking. Then there's a singularity, it's gravitational singularity. And I was toying with the idea of coming back here and not talking about any of this, but talking about the fascinating discovery of binary black holes discovered by the LIGO experiment, proving gravitational waves exist for the first time. Maybe next year I'll come back and talk about that. So at the center of all galaxies that are major-sized galaxies are black holes. It's a gravitational singularity. They're both governed by the same types of mathematics. So if you look at how you simulate how the brain works, here's a neuron cell. If you keep zooming in, here's the actual circuitry. This is Nick Spitzer, who I helped set you guys up with last year. He gave a talk here at the Sunday Assembly, I think, in June. He gave me these slides. So if you look at an axon, a dendrite, and all the neurotransmitters across them, the question is, what happens if you keep zooming in on those neural circuits, those gooey, wet circuits inside of our heads? So you get to DNA, obviously. What happens if you zoom in on DNA? Well, you get, say, a water molecule that's in there. Can you keep zooming? Yep, you can keep zooming. With the most powerful microscopes that we have, particle colliders, you'll see that they're actually composed of protons are composed of quarks, neutrons too. Pions, everything else that's made of matter, ordinary baryonic matter, is composed of these types of quarks. Question is, can you keep zooming? So the question that people have been thinking about is something called string theory, which has direct implications for the multiverse, predicts that at the heart of these objects are vibrating tiny strings of fundamental bits of energy that cannot be destroyed or created. Other people, though, attempt to do the atomistic approach of Leibniz and others, and just keep zooming in. And the way that they do this is with this tool called lattice quantum chromodynamics, lattice QCD for short. So it requires very high performance computing to do it, and basically what you do is you discretize all of space and time. This is putting the matrix, which is a grid, a table of numbers, into the matrix. It's my corny little pun, but actually this is what we do. We grid up space-time, not on the size scale of, of human scales, but actually these microscopic scales parameterized by really two numbers: the maximum length scale in the problem, which has to be bigger than a quark, and then the minimum scale, which is the resolution. So just like on your iPhone, you want the resolution to be really high and you want the screen size to be really big. But those are at odds with each other. That's why you keep having this escalating war of megapixels, right? So, but physicists have solved this on giant supercomputers, and they have to not only play with what's called the two-body problem or the three-body problem, but also something called the zero-body problem, which is that the vacuum of empty space is alive and bubbling with particles coming into and out of existence on extremely rapid timescales. So you deal with space and time, four-dimensional problem, pixelized at a trillionth of a billionth of a meter scales. incredibly fine resolution. And it's not quite good enough. And what's happening is over time, the behavior of these simulations is not following Moore's law anymore. So it's a little bit scary that we're not going to be able to get to this ultimate extrapolation I'll talk about, maybe without using another type of tool, which my group is working on at UCSD. We have a patent on what's a fundamental element of a quantum computer, which may be able to supersede the digital transistor-based computers you guys have in your pockets. And this is called a qubit, and a qubit, a fundamental qubit we invented at UCSD, it's a technique of dealing with it, my graduate student Stephanie Moyerman and myself, of making a qubit which operates near absolute zero temperature, and it has the ability to not only have zeros and ones on and off like a transistor, but it can be 0, 1, or sort of halfway between, and that actually opens up a vast amount of computing power. And I assume, eventually somebody will come and give you guys a talk about this. It's a fascinating subject. Some people, including my friend David Brin, who's a UCSD alum, conjectures that actually neurons are quantum computers. I'm not going to talk about that, but that is a connection between the quantum computing that we think will take us beyond Moore's law and this ability that we have in our brains to conceive of things that computers can't even touch just yet. So, as I said, we all have these things with us. I don't always carry this around, but I had to wrestle it away from my 5-year-old today. How many of you have one of these types of devices, either Oculus type thing or this actual Google Cardboard thing? They're really fun to use, and it's really an example of a prosthetic device for your brain, for your imagination, for your vision. You can take virtual trips right now. I was really dismayed when it came in with my copy of the Sunday Times, and it came, I was like, oh, I'm going to show this to my 5-year-old, my 3-year-old. They're going to love it. It's going to be so much fun. It's like, come to Rwanda and see the genocide. And I'm like, I'm not going to show that to my 5-year-old. But in the future, certainly we'll be using this to take virtual reality vacations. And if we're going to do this in the future, we're actually doing it now. What's to say that somebody else hasn't already done that and is using us sort of as a host organism? And I want to talk about that briefly in a minute. So what Nick Spitzer and others work on at UCSD is mapping out the connections in the brain. When you see visual stimuli, it gets converted to electrical activity, maybe to quantum electrical activity. That's speculative. But certainly ordinary analog electrical activity. This shows when somebody's looking at something, all the different pathways that the electrical stimuli will go through the brain. I think it looks kind of like, if you actually break it down, a simple part of it, a simple part. Elementary doesn't mean easy, it just means easier to represent, perhaps. So here's the visual system of the visual cortex, a partial description of it, just a mapping of all the network analyses that go into it. And here's this early microprocessor from the 1980s. They look very similar. Again, coincidence? Yeah, maybe. But let's explain the coincidences. Okay, so let's get into what this has to do with simulation, the Matrix. You got to show Keanu Reeves, come on. Okay, what's a talk about simulations without him? So a lot of people have been thinking about this. There's some books about this that I'll refer you guys to in the links. And there's been people that have thought, really, how do you first define a playground to describe these types of phenomena? So they conjecture, and this is just this one professor of philosophy's conjecture, that an experience is simulated if it's produced by non-standard methods. That could be a computer simulation, it could be a hallucination that's induced by chemicals, like the poem that Stephanie read. That was a hallucination induced by chemicals. What if she didn't volunteer to do that, but someone forced her to do that? What if you take her out of her body and just have her brain in a jar? And then did it to her. Is that different? Is that a simulation? Is that reality? Who's in control of the agency of that individual? And then if you simulate a part of your life, well, it's hard to really decouple a fundamental element of the simulation from the entire simulation. So by the second definition, we're all simulated, or at least partially simulated existences. And as I said earlier, we all have multiple Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, whatever, Pinterest, all these different identities online. And some of us have different avatars and different examples and extensions of ourselves online too. It's been estimated there's about 10 identities per person. So if there's 7 billion people on Earth, that's 70 billion different unique identities that are potentially possible.
So the main proponent of this model of simulated existence is this guy, Nick Bostrom. He's a philosopher from Scandinavia. I have this link to this paper on the website. So there's many, many different examples of multiple existences. Okay, I've only got 5 real minutes to go. So really, if you think of the map of the universe of reality and simulated reality, there's many, many more virtual lives than real lives. That's the notion to take away. I'll skip over this. Let me just make the connection to today, The Life of Brian. I said I would have a shout out to my favorite movie, and the connection between the Matrix, because of course Brian's supposed to be Jesus, and today's Easter, right? So he says, everybody thinks that they're their own individual person, and then there's a famous scene where he says, look, you've got it all wrong, you don't need to follow me, you don't need to follow anybody, you've got to think for yourselves, you're all individuals. And they say, yes, we are all individuals. Okay? So you all think that you're individual, but how do you know that you're really individual? Again, I don't have time to talk. Let me just say that computers are being able to just barely scratch the surface of simulated existence, but it's becoming very popular, and it's going to only increase over time. Okay, I don't have time to really go through this, but suffice to say that it will be possible to simulate not only the quantum chromodynamics, but also individual simple organisms, DNA, and beyond. We already, when I was a teenager or whatever, they had this game called The Sims, and there are other types of Sims that you could do, as I mentioned. You could have controlled hallucinations, you could have implants, you could have man-animal interfaces. David Brin's written a book about how humans can aid dolphins to let them step up the chain of evolution to become actually technologically intelligent, not just actually intelligent life forms. So the last thing I really want people to think about is, what if you could put the VR into VRBO? Okay, so what if you had a virtual reality by owner, which is to say that in the future, people could come back in time and you would rent out your body for them to go back in time into. For example, wouldn't you like to have lunch with Einstein or Jesus? Well, maybe not Jesus in this room, but wouldn't you like Hume? Maybe Hume, anybody? So you'd like to go back in time. I'd like to see Lucy, have a conversation. What was her life like, 3.5 million years ago? So we obviously would like to do this, and we'd like to do it. In particular, we always think, oh, we'd like to go back and meet Einstein or somebody like that. And it really highlights this notion that if it's possible to do this, people will be doing this. If you could go back and meet Einstein, maybe you'd pay $100 to do it, maybe you pay $1,000, maybe you pay $1 million to do it. Depends on who you are. What about to meet your great-grandparents? So the question is, how do you get back to, how is this actually possible to do this? I don't have really time to go into this. But again, the most important thing to really realize is that it may be indistinguishable. If you're a certain person like Einstein, or perhaps in the future people who want to come back and see this distinguished individual, that's Kim Kardashian. So people want to come back in time and spend a day with her, try to keep up with her, right? But what about you? You might be boring. I'm thinking I'm pretty boring. I'm a professor. I have to pay people to really be around me. The students surely don't like to be there. But so for an ordinary person, would you like to have to come back in time and just see some ordinary person? So if you're sufficiently boring, maybe a future VRBO owner won't want to go and inhabit your body, but maybe not. It may be interesting to see how a 21st century individual lived. This lastly brings up this notion of creation. If you're a simulator creator, you have a lot of responsibility, right? If you think that you're real, and maybe let's say you are real, then a simulator in the future is sort of like a god, right? Coming back, inhabiting your body. Can they kill you? Is that ethical? So it brings up all these notions that many people that are secular maybe haven't really wrestled with, because they might have dismissed the notion of an omnipotent, omniscient person, or an omniscient entity. But maybe there is, and maybe we are. A lot of my friends and colleagues, and 50% of you on Twitter, you can't argue with that, think that you're simulated, okay? So if you're simulated, how big a jump is it to then think, well, maybe there's something like a deity that's controlling the simulation? And is that indistinguishable from organized religion? I'm just asking you to think about it. I'm not advocating either way. We already have these things. Minecraft. I have my cousin who spends thousands of dollars of real money on buying things in a virtual world. It's so amazing that this is happening. So as I said, it might be that we're way outnumbered by virtual Sims floating around in here. It's a good thing for membership, though. You get a lot more members that way. And the last thing I want to do is there a saving grace? If you're scared by this, I maybe have convinced you that it might be happen sometime in the future. People take a virtual reality vacation to today. And the question is, will this be sustainable? First of all, we have to simulate all of physics. From physics, you could get chemistry. From chemistry, you could get biology. Then eventually psychology, sociology, it's religion, everything else. The question is, can you extrapolate beyond here? I showed you Moore's law is rolling over, and there's a variety of reasons I can talk to people about after the talk as to why that's happening. The last depressing thing, to me at least, is everything I've talked about simulating reality. As I told you last time, the material that we're made up of, ordinary baryonic matter, is only 4% of the universe. So we're having trouble simulating 4% of the universe. There's still 25 times that amount left for us to simulate to really say we understand the physics and then can understand chemistry, biology, sociology. So maybe it's premature to be really nervous about this today. But maybe they've made us feel relaxed about it. Okay, I'm just going to leave with this. I'm over time. I've been thinking a lot about it. I think it's really fun to think about it. I'm not taking a position either way, but I think it's really fun to talk about it. And as I said, I put a lot of links on the website. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much for a great talk today. For our next sing-along, we are going to welcome back Paul Svensson with the Grandmother Song by Mr. S. Martin.
You remember, where Brian was talking about, that these things are possible, but he didn't have time to go into that, that part? Well, he and I got together a little bit beforehand, and he showed me the trick. And so I went back, and I met my great-grandmother, and in Sweden, of course, and she told me the wisdom. I only had a couple of moments because it was really fast. The software's not really working well. And I said, Grandma, tell me something. Tell me what I ought to know. 100 and some odd years later, she said these things. Be courteous, kind, and forgiving. Be gentle and peaceful each day. Be warm and human and grateful. And have a good thing to say. Okay, I can handle that. Be thoughtful and trustful and childlike. Be witty and happy and wise. Be honest and love all your neighbors. Be obsequious, purple, and clairvoyant. There was a glitch in the matrix. And she went on. Be pompous, obese, and eat cactus. Be dull and boring and omnipresent. Criticize things you don't know about. Be oblong and have your knees removed. Come on, Grandma. Be tasteless, rude, and offensive. Live in a swamp and be three-dimensional. Put a live chicken in your underwear. Get all excited and go to a yawning festival. So thanks, Grandma, and then I just popped back to today, and here I am now. So let's all sing this together. I'll just throw out the words old school. Be courteous, kind, and forgiving. Be courteous, kind, and be warm. Be gentle and peaceful each day. Be gentle and peaceful. Be warm and human and grateful. Be warm and human and have a good thing to say. And have a good thing to say. Oh, that's good. Be thoughtful, trustful, and childlike. Be thoughtful, trustful, and be witty and happy and wise. Be witty and happy and wise. Be honest and love all your neighbors. Be honest and love all your... Be obsequious, purple, and clairvoyant. Be obsequious, purple, and clairvoyant. Be pompous, obese, and eat cactus. Be pompous, obese, and eat cactus. Be dull and boring and omnipresent. Be dull and boring and omnipresent. Criticize things you don't know about. Criticize things you don't know about. Be oblong and have your knees removed. Be oblong and have your knees removed. Everybody's singing. Be tasteless, rude, and offensive. Be tasteless, rude, and offensive. Live in a swamp and be three-dimensional. Live in a swamp and be three-dimensional. Put a live chicken in your underwear. Put a live chicken in your... Get all excited and go to a yawning festival. Get all excited and go to a yawning festival. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Grandma.
We're coming now to a segment called Personal Moment. This is one of my favorite parts of a Sunday assembly. We have had hilarious personal moments. They've made us laugh. They've made us cry. They connect us. Whenever I talk to people about Sunday assembly and I ask them, what did you like best? One of the most consistent answers that I get is, I loved the personal moment. But we can't have them without you, our assemblers. It's one of the hardest spots to fill and one of the most important. So if you have a personal moment, something that's happened that you'd like to share with us, we really want to hear it. And you can see Laura right there in the front about scheduling. Today's personal moment is being brought to us by Alexis Wesley.
No pressure. So our theme this month is reality, and I wanted to go into one of my childhood memories where reality got blurred. So when I grew up on a hill, a little hill in Northern California, where my great-grandmother lived at the bottom of the hill, we lived in the middle, my other grandmother lived at the top, and all my cousins and aunt and uncles lived right over. So we literally owned the entire hill. So all of these extended family members were my dad's side of the family, and my mom was very gracious about in-laws who came over unannounced all the time, anytime, to the front door, had their own key. So she was very gracious though, and got along with them really well, but this isn't one of those memories. It's when there was tension. So now my grandfather was a gamer. He had the Atari 2600, ooh. And I remember playing that, and I played a yellow square. And we went through a castle as the yellow square. And we're eaten by ducks. Do you remember this game? Okay, duck, two-dimensional, pixelated. But he had bought a brand new NES, Nintendo Entertainment System. And we played Joust and Mario 1, 2, and 3 and Tetris and Legend of Zelda, but then they came out with Link 2, Legend of Zelda, the second game. I remember watching my grandfather play this game one day for 8 hours straight, where I would run to the bathroom like a bullet and run back. What did I miss? Oh, Grandpa couldn't figure out how to walk into this wall, and that my grandfather had a Parkinson's-like condition, so this was painful watching. And I couldn't play because it was too new to let Lexi play. I was in elementary school. But anyway, and we'd guzzle Sunny D and just watch him for hours. Well, he got to the 7th dungeon. That's the dungeon before the last one in the game. And he was stuck. He ran into these locked doors and couldn't get past them. And people are like, I see people like, yeah, that one. So he got so frustrated that he thrust the game into my arms and said, you get to play it. And I was like, and I just wordlessly left right out the door, walked down the hill, and he yells after me, wait. And this was the most threatening he'd ever gotten. Do not touch my game. Okay, all right. So I walk in, and I'm like, Mom, I've got this game. And she's like, okay, all right. I don't want your grandfather to murder me, so I'm going to handle the game, and I will put it in for you. You don't touch it. Okay. So she blew on the back, stuck it in the machine, turned it on, and I'm just like, and she's like, wait, I've got to register a game. And she's like, click. She deleted his entire game. The whole thing. He had all the heart containers, he had all the items. He had been playing for, I think, 3 months straight. And that's all he did. He worked, but then he'd get home and he'd play. So she just froze. And I was like, and I start to get up and she's like, stay, do not say anything. And she's just pacing, like, what's she gonna do? And I'm thinking, what are her real options here? She can run away and change her name. She can burn the house down and, collateral damage with the game. And she just goes, how hard could this be? I'm gonna play it. And get him back to where he was. My mother, a very conservative lady in a sundress who liked crocheting and knitting and playing the piano and judging and kind of made me feel like playing video games was a sin sometimes. This was my mother. She was more likely to roll her eyes than actually play the game or watch the game. And for the next week and a half, that's all she did, stay-at-home mom, was play this game. I'd walk in a room, no eye contact. She would just play and play and play, and occasionally she'd be like, Lexi, get in here. I did the thing with the thing. I'm like, game, can I play? No. And Grandpa wants his game back. No, don't answer the phone. Don't answer the door. So for hours and hours and hours, for weeks, her reality was an elf boy in an adventure land where that was her avatar. And you ask her, what did you do today? And she would say, oh, I learned fire magic. Like that was a normal mom thing to say. Finally, we returned the game. She had gotten to the 7th dungeon. She gave it back, and Grandpa blew on the back, put it in, and he looked at his game. And the first thing he did in the 7th dungeon was go right through the first door. And he went back to his inventory, and he saw he had a skeleton key. Where did I get the skeleton key? Because now the dungeon was easy. And my mom was like, you don't remember where you got the skeleton key? Which turns out you have to go into the sacred area with the hammer and hammer the bushes that are hidden, and then you go and you find the secret town, and we had to hide from Ganon, and then you go to the end, and then there's a big tunnel, but you can only do it if you got the spell, which is labeled spell really conveniently, and then this big tower comes up, and you go into a cave, and at the bottom of the cave, at the end of the cave, is the skeleton key that you get, and then you go all the way back, and then you're in the 7th castle, and then you can go through all the doors. And my grandfather, full of pride, oh yeah, I got the skeleton key, and my mom got away with it.
Thank you very much. That was fantastic. My brother and I, we like to visit my father. He lives in Boise, Idaho. And when we do, we like to drive. It's about 967 miles. But we enjoy the drive. We're very good company together. And it's 967 miles up and back, and we usually go to points beyond. Sometimes we stop through Death Valley, and it's about a 2,300-mile trip. And one thing about my brother and I is that we're very comfortable in each other's company. We feel very comfortable not talking for very long periods of time. So we could be driving in the desert, and my brother's driving, and I'm passaging, and it could be, oh look, there's a dust devil. Oh yeah. And that's good for us. It works very well. We like that. But when the sun sets, I say this because my brother's right over there, so hi John. When the sun sets, though, for some reason we start talking, and the thing we talk about is reality, our perception of it, about our perception of life. We often talk about this. Because we all know there's a reality, just what is, and then there's our perception of life. And for me, the thing that helps me go through life is something that I keep in mind, which I'd like to show a graphic representation, because you know I love those. Amy, if you wouldn't mind to help me with this. I brought some rope, which is going to represent the timeline of the history of the planet Earth. And for those of you down front that may roll toward you, just kick it. This is from the BBC History of the Planet Earth. Here you would, if you just walk back that way, if you don't mind, just keep going. Earth is about 4.5 billion years old. The earliest materials on the planet Earth are 4.3 billion years old, zircon crystals. Earth had a violent geological beginning, being constantly bombarded by meteorites. But then the surface cooled to a crust, and the first rocks were born. Just have to keep going, Amy. I'm sorry, just keep going. The world then was just a global ocean, and just peppered with a little bit of islands. And it was through erosion, sedimentation, and volcanic activity, possibly some more meteor strikes, that the first proto-continents were formed. Yes, just keep going. And then the continents grew to their current size 2.5 billion years ago. And the face of the Earth then, the map looked different than it does today, because the continents collided and keep going. And it looks different than it did today, as can be seen by this photograph of Pangaea taken from space 2.5 billion years ago. The history of life on Earth is about 3.8 billion years old. It's started with single-celled animals. I'm sorry, that's really embarrassing. I apologize. Excuse me just a moment. Oh, it's... Hi, Amy. What? There's a wall? Yeah, I'm not even to humans yet. No, I'm sorry, you'll have to go over it. Okay, well, if you need help, let me know. Okay, all right, bye. Sorry about that. There was multicellular life was about 1 billion years later. The kind of life that we know now is about 570 million years ago. That started with arthropods. 530 million years ago for fish, and 475 million years ago for land plants, and 370 million years ago for forests. It was mammals 200 million years ago, and our own species, Homo sapien, only 200,000 years ago. So that means that humans have only been alive on the planet Earth for 0.004% of the history of the planet Earth, which looks like this. Okay. She's okay, she said. This is what I think about when I think about my decision making. So am I saying that in the vastness of all of this, that nothing is important? No, maybe waiting behind somebody writing a check in line, maybe I could think about that in a different way when I'm thinking about this. But I have a workmate that I've known her for the 3 years that I've worked at the place that I've worked, and she's a lovely, lovely person, super positive all the time, and she's been going through cancer treatments, and she still remains positive all the time. Even when she's wearing a wig at work, she makes everybody feel comfortable around her, and today she's in hospice. That's important. This makes me realize that we're all in this together. We're all in the same boat. And we're all of the same generation, young and old. I mean, we're the generation of the human beings that are alive right now. We're in this together. And remember, I didn't cut a piece off the end of the history of the world. I cut a piece out of the middle. That means that we're in this with the people ahead of us and the earth ahead of us, and so that's what affects my decision making. And I cherish the fact that I get to spend this time with you, to be a person who's going to take care of the people in the future, and I'm so fortunate to be stuck in the middle with you. Thank you. See if I can find Amy.
Thanks, Stephen. That was great, as always. We're going to take just a minute now for a quiet reflection, a short time for us to just be together in each other's presence, be quiet, and reflect on whatever we choose to.
All right, thank you very much. There are so many ways to connect at Sunday Assembly. We're going to go through just a couple of them with some announcements. And those people that are doing announcements, if you wouldn't mind to come on up, and I will just let them go straight through. I think they've got the order here, so take it away, Stephanie.
Oh no, not this again. We're going to be teaming up with Harvest Crops on Sunday, April 3rd to pick oranges to help people in need from a private residency. And we need 8 volunteers still, so if you'd like to sign up, See Sandra in the back right after the assembly.
All right, Sunday Assembly San Diego is having a booth at Earth Fair. This is April 17th from 10 to 5. We have a sign-up sheet in the back if you'd like to take a shift. Also, please feel free to drop by and say hi.
And hey, y'all, we're having a party. So, April 30th, we're throwing a crawfish boil. My associate, Neil Hamovich, and I are co-hosting the first inaugural fundraiser for the Sunday Assembly. Should be a good time, y'all. Come on out.
Nice job. Everybody's so succinct today, so I will do the same. Just want to make sure everybody knows there's Sunday Assembly is an international organization. There's more than 70 assemblies in the world. The international conference this year is in Utrecht in the Netherlands, and everybody's invited, so if you're interested in going, that's something you can look online and get tickets for. I think the website was on there, but we can talk to any of us, we can get you there, but it's a really good time. And then also, Sunday Assembly has a table and is doing an assembly at the Reason Rally. That's a Sunday Assembly in the United States, Sunday Assembly area America, so it won't be many of us that'll be actually there, but we're represented at the Reason Rally, and that is on the date that you see there, Saturday for the Reason Rally and Sunday for the event. And I do want to make sure that you know the Sunday Assembly is a completely not-for-profit organization. We're run entirely by volunteers. We do appreciate any donations you can make. You can go onto our website, use your credit card or your debit card or whatever you need to do to make a donation. We particularly would welcome your reoccurring donations. That's what helps us to do what we do here, pay for the facility. Obviously, there's a cost for the things that we do. And we do appreciate the many reoccurring donors we have, but if you consider a donation in any amount, that's certainly appreciated.
For our last sing-along today, welcome Paul back with Sweet Caroline. I know y'all know the words of this one, so let's hear it.
Okay. I said, okay, what happened here? Hello? Everything went dead. Please stand by. An audio professional will be with you in just a moment. Who's going to what? La la la, nice lady. There we go. So because I am interested in your musical education, that's better. Because I'm interested in your musical education, I want you to know that last time I brought my Pete Seeger 12-string because we were doing a song that Pete used to do, or stolen a song that Pete used to do. Anyway, this is my Neil Diamond guitar. This is an Everly Brothers Gibson for anybody who cares about guitars, and if you look at any of the 60s Neil Diamond, he's playing a black Everly Brothers guitar because we're doing a Neil Diamond song, so I had to bring the right guitar. Thank you very much. Let's all get up and sing this thing. Where it began, I can't begin to know. It's growing strong. Was it the spring? And spring began the summer. Who'd have believed you'd come along? Touching hands, reaching out, touching me, touching you. Sweet Caroline, good times never seem so good. I've been inclined to believe I never would, but now I look at the night. Come over here, Leah. It seems so lonely. We fill it up with only two. You guys sound good this morning. You sounded good. And when I hurt, burden comes off my shoulders. close. How can I hurt when holding you? Warm, touching warm. Come on now. Reaching out, touching me, touching you. Sweet Caroline, good times never seem so good, so good. I've been inclined to believe they never would. Sing it again now. Sweet Caroline, good times never seem so good. I've been inclined to believe they never could. Sweet Caroline.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Laura, for the special effects during the song. That was especially nice.
I think you might get turned around.
Please join us for our next assembly, April 24th,
24th.
Sunday. We have coffee, tea, snacks in the back. Come back and visit, chat a little bit.
As usual, a lot of people meet at Pizzicato. They're open today, so Pizzicato after the snacks. Thank you all for coming. Happy Sunday!
Thanks again, Paul. Oh, you bet. And grabbing equalizer government is doing wonders. All have been passed on to 2 more hearing impaired. Excellent, man. Excellent. You bet, man.
I like your guitar.
Thank you.
Wow, my brothers would love this. Awesome.
It's an Everly Brothers.